Okay? So, welcome to the last session of the day. Sadaka come back. So, first of all, let me thank all the 10 organizations and government agencies that have shared the work that they are doing. And I think we were having a conversation before we went out about moving just from discussing the policies and regulations and what have you to practice. And I think you have some idea of some of the things that partners are doing that is in that space of practice. So please let me ask you to give them a hand clap for that one. Right? Then the second part.
So I want to request, and this is always the most difficult part in a Kenyan meeting, wale ambao tuko nyuma tusonge mbele. There definitely should be no one beyond the half mark point. So Juliet and David, inueni mikono. So nobody should be behind Juliet and David. Jota muone panelists, because we are moving to the panel. You cannot see them from that far back. There's some space up katikati. I don't know what the... Is the light? Charlene, you are behind David and... There's still some space up here, down here next to Abraham. I assure you he's a nice guy. The worst I've seen him do is encourage me to go for leave when I don't want to. Okay, so we're now going to switch gears, and as I said before we went for tea break and the World Cafes, is that we'll still have an opportunity to engage among each other a bit more and ask a couple of more questions to some of the people in the room who definitely understand this topic pretty well. So we are going to have a short panel which is going to provide us an opportunity to push the discussion a little bit more in terms of where are we, where do we think we should be going, things happening the way they are in the space where we are supposed to be discussing how to deal with inequalities. And for this we have a very nice panel with people who work in different spaces, so they bring quite a diverse array of knowledge. So first of all, and for obvious reasons, is Professor Yash Palgai. Professor Yash is a household name in Kenya for a very long time due to his work around our constitution, but I'm sure one day Prof will also tell you the stories of his life and Ufungamano House. He has a history, as I said. Karibu sana Prof. Prof, of course, works with Katiba Institute, which has been doing a lot of work in getting Kenyans to understand what exactly the Constitution means and what it means for our rights. Karibu, Professor. Next, from the Council of Governors, and a person I have come to interact with and like her technical knowledge in matters to do with the budgets and finance and where we work, is Mercy Wangoi. Mercy works with the Council of Governors, and as you will learn very shortly, she understands that space very, very well. Prof, you'll sit up here. Then we have a lady who I always call the activist of activists, because whenever there are activists and then there is Njoki Njehu, because Njoki is special. So Njoki works with Fight Inequality Alliance, and her perspective around inequalities in the region, so it's not just Kenya. I think Fight Inequality has done quite some work in understanding what exactly inequality looks like in practice, and Njoki's perspective has always been a very great place for us to learn from, and she's been part of Equity Week for a very long time. Karibu sana Njoki. Then I'll invite one man who did not want to be on this panel, but I gave him no choice. Dr. Abraham Rugo works with the International Budget Partnership, and the one thing that we never, so whenever we speak about Abraham, we talk about him from, he works with the International Budget Partnership. But Abraham was quite a player when it came to our devolved system of governance. And if you remember, there was a time there used to be a task force. What was the name of that task force? The task force on devolved governments. Abraham was part of that clique. So his understanding of devolution and exactly what we are supposed to achieve with it is something that we are going to hear a little bit more. So we are going to keep it to the 4. I had thought I would pull in a couple of more additional people, but I was told time is not on our side. So we are going to go straight into a conversation with them, and I am nominating myself. Okay, so the questions for my panel are going to be very much related to the conversation we've been having so far, and some of the conversations that already came up from the questions and comments that were given by different colleagues in the room. And I think it's going to be good to hear the perspective from, a more government side, which is where Mercy sits, more civil society side. Prof, of course, is everything from academic to legal, so quite a nice array there. And for Abraham, of course, from a public finance perspective as well. So my first question is a positive one. I was told whenever Kenyans we start things, we start from lamenting. So no lamenting in the first question. Now, from what we've seen, outsiders colleagues shared the work that they are doing, but also from the experiences in the spaces where we work, there are some things we are doing right in dealing with marginalization and inequalities. So from where you sit, what do you think have been those positive steps that we've made, and why is it that those positive steps are happening so that we can build on them? I'll start with Njoki.
Thank you. I think that there are many things that Kenya is doing right, and that is setting policy. And if I were to have a thesis or a new gospel that I'm preaching, it is the gospel of implementation. Because we have great policies, we look great on paper. I'm going to rain a little bit on your parade and say that because we have great policies but no implementation, that is where you can have the President of the Republic receiving a global award for universal health care, same month or same week maybe even, that a woman dies because she doesn't have 20 shillings to pay for services for maternal health while giving birth. So we are doing right in terms of the policies we've got some very smart people, very inspired people, very talented people who have come up with all kinds of policies. And it starts with the constitution to even the idea of devolved government. But all of those are coming to naught because we do not have implementation. I spend a lot of my time working, besides inequality, on women land rights. We have great policies. We have a great National Land Commission. We have land control boards that are doing the right things, but still women are not getting their land rights because implementation is a problem.
sorry. So there's been a lot of street understanding and all that. But what we are hearing, even in the conversations, you hear more and more people referring to evidence. However much that evidence may be minimally understood, trying to refer, for instance, to what data is showing, trying to even collect information about how many people are attending facilities in healthcare centers, which I think is a good thing, that people are starting to get conscious about evidence and its place. It was interesting, for instance, to hear colleagues in Baringo say that they are starting to realize that they cannot continue to share resources equally and expect good results coming from even the county. So I think for me those two things are really, really a positive.
Well, I have to say that I am on the whole rather, I won't say pessimistic, but I'm certainly sad at the relatively limited implementation of the Constitution. I think the process of making the Constitution was just wonderful. I went around the country twice, villages, talking to people and telling them, speak to your mind, don't worry. And they said, but this commissioner is with you. I said, commissioner will go away now and you should talk to me. And to a large extent, the Constitution is really based on what Kenyans told us. So it had a lot of promise in it. But I feel, looking at different areas of the Constitution, that we haven't really achieved very much. I think we the Constitution has fallen into hands of people who have no commitment to it. We had a new and radical Constitution, but we didn't have any change of leadership. I often think of South Africa, where there was a great resistance to or fight against apartheid. And then they did get a constitution written by Mandela's and so on, people of great courage and integrity, intelligence. And when they had their constitution, then the group that came to power was not the previous one, nor the apartheid one. It came by people who had fought and fought and fought for independence, for fairness, and they lived up to the expectations they had if they won. We borrowed quite a lot of South African constitution, learned a lot from them, but our results were different. We did achieve a good constitution. In fact, South African friends tell me ours is better, their own. And of course, in a way it is, because we're able to learn from them and build on our own thinking. But Mandela became, the leader when they had a change, and he was honest, hardworking, so on. We didn't have that. The leadership went back to the very people who had created the problems, which required us to review the whole thing. And that, I think, is a big worry. That's why I think we haven't made achievements. And if you look at what is our politics today, is it about? I've even given up reading. Raila says one thing, Ruto says something, and what is it about? Except themselves. They never talk about all this controversy that you see. It has no content, it's not related to the Constitution. Though we do hear of something called BBI. We haven't seen it yet. I have to admit, they did consult me at one stage of their work. So I think that makes me very sad. And some of you may know, I'm now working very actively in what I deliberately call slums. And I see the degree of poverty is unbearable. Kids who can't go to school. So I've been raising money for them so they could go. There's so much, it's hard to describe the difficulties in which they live. 1 meal a day if they are lucky. And children can't go to school very often. And then you look at the other end. How do they live? Great affluence. We know all that. We see big buildings going up. We know how these people live. And so I'm very disappointed, I have to say. I have not given up hope. You all here inspire my hope. Sitting and listening before we came here in the room outside, I felt, well, aren't we lucky? There are these people around who are describing what they were doing, and they were giving a lot of, I'm sure, themselves to this. So that gives me some hope that we have people who are willing to work towards the Constitution, its implementation. I think the Kenyans I talked to, and I talked to many, are all saying, well, this is a good Constitution. And I always say, it's your Constitution. But we haven't achieved much. And then I said, well, is it your fault? Or, it's not our fault. I said, who did you vote for? And it is often their fault, I'm afraid. And also, I'm a bit disappointed that people in civil society haven't done more. I mean, they've done quite a lot, but I'm sorry they haven't gone into politics. If I were not so old, I would probably have stood for parliament. But I haven't lost hope. The amount of talent I see in our country is incredible, incredible. I've been to a lot of Africa. I don't think anybody can compete with us. So I think the potential is there, and I haven't given up hope. But I have been rather sad that we haven't really made greater progress. And I think the poor people of today were a little bit better before the Constitution came. And isn't it a pity? Because I used to do figures that I think you can get them annual, I think, about the level of living, and one which is, you get the basic decencies of life and food, and then the lower one, which is you're deprived of that. And when the Constitution came out, I think about 50% were doing okay. If you read figures since then, it's gone down steadily. So the people who are living well are about 20-30%. The number who live badly, their number has gone up a lot. And it makes me sad that we now have the beginning of a class. It is no longer a tribal issue or less. They exploit us on the tribal basis. But I think the issue now is class, poor versus the rich. And I think we must address that question.
Thank you. As it has been rightfully said by the other panelists, I think we have enough policies in this space. The implementation have been a challenge. So I think there is a call to internal mechanism on commitment of how we want to push this agenda. It's no longer about a vacuum in the legal framework. It's now a vacuum in the internal capacity of individuals entrusted with these functions.
As you have seen, I clearly failed in my first effort to get everyone to say nice things. So let me move this conversation slightly a bit to push my panelists a little bit. Now, I think from the definition of it is that policy-wise, and we are always very quick to find policy solutions, even in scenarios where probably that's not what is needed. But the question is, why is it that there is that struggle to make the shift between this policy conversation after policy conversation to the practice? What exactly is off? Is it that we don't have the capacity, as Mercy has said? Is it that we actually don't have human capacity to think about the evidence we need, to think through what is the best way to ensure we have inclusive practices in terms of how we do our planning, how we do our budgets? Where is the gap? Why is it that we are not making that transition?
Well, that's a really big question and an interesting one. But I actually think that it is not a lack of capacity. I think that there is great intention to keep the things the way they are. For those who enjoy the largesse of the states of their wealth, to be able to continue to do that. There's this language where, whether you're talking about the SDGs, where they talk about leave no one behind. But actually, I think it is not a question of leaving people behind. It is a question of pushing people behind, where you have policies, as Prof has said, where when I went to school, just to date myself a little bit, I went to school under the free primary education, the original one, and not this one, the original one. I'm not 844 class. I am before 844. And when they said free primary education, there was a lot of logistics to manage that. So you shared textbooks, but you had textbooks to share. And it required a lot of organization. So we have a system, and it goes all the way from the top, the global system, the political economy under which we operate, and that oppression, that exclusion, that denial of rights, of services, of resources, of opportunities, goes from the global level, that trickles down to the individual person. So I was just saying in our group that I was in a meeting with people from Liberia, Nigeria, Mali, Burkina Faso, Sierra Leone, Ghana, and the stories that we tell here of lack of services and resources, of poor governance, of poor leadership, of no leadership, are the stories that are being told everywhere. Is it that the entire African continent is devoid of capacity, of talent, and all the rest? My argument is that it is not. That is not the case. We have all of those things, but we also have a system that is bent on maintaining the status quo, so that those people who have wealth, they maintain and increase that, and those who do not continue to be deprived. I want to give an example, very quick example. We are in a country where the language of billionaire and millionaire hustlers is acceptable. Somebody flies in here in a helicopter and then they call themselves a hustler, and we all clap because we think that they are hustlers like we are hustlers. We are identifying with them. What is that about? We live in a country where a budget is set, where textbooks and sanitary towels and medication has VAT on them, but helicopter spare parts and small aircraft spare parts do not have VAT. What is that about? It is about extreme wealth, having influence, having vested interest, having power and access. That is the problem that we have. And as people, we need to be organizing ourselves. We need to be building the movement to make sure that our demands are met, to make sure that we hold accountable. We take names. We take names and we hold people accountable so that when somebody says they are hustler and we know that they are multi-millionaire or a billionaire, we say to them, no, we need to be speaking truth to power. All is not well. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Because as I said before, and I think a number of people here have agreed on the panel, and out there probably would also agree, we have the policies, it's the implementation. It is not that people are being left behind. People are intentionally being pushed behind. We ask the question, you've had this question asked, how is it that the primary school in a very, very remote area, they are able to get ballot papers come election year, but they can't get teachers, they can't get textbooks? What is it that makes us a nation of schools where presidential debates are held and schools where people go to vote and have nothing?
I think for me, it's just one thing. I get a sense that those of us who have had the privilege of getting education in this country do not engage in matters of this country. It's been said variously, we call them middle class, we call them middle class wannabe, whatever we call them. But the fact is, many of us have been privileged to have education and have an understanding of the things that are supposed to happen, but we've all resorted to self-help. So, you find people, they find there's no water. What do? They come together, they dig a borehole for themselves. So they solve their own problem, but are not bothered about what about the people who cannot access that borehole. Gated community has become the in thing now. Why is it catching so much? Because in there, you get a selfish sense of security. You employ your own security, you build a small kindergarten there for your children. Some are even going to the extent of employing a doctor, or a doctor who is resident there becomes the doctor on call, and you dig your own borehole, basically provide public services that you still pay for in taxation. So I think that awareness needs to rise, and part of what we do at IBP is try to push that conversation, that yes, we don't have to worry about food, but there's somebody who worries about food. And therefore it stops to be that we are working so hard to move away from poverty and literally run away from it, and yet we have an opportunity to engage. But a second related issue is the fact that we have really compartmentalized public life and private life, in the sense that we assume public life is for certain people. We assume once we have elected an MCA, he or she should know what is good for us. We assume that once we have elected, I'm always amazed when I travel around this country, the esteem with which public leaders are held, even when they are so responsible for the very problems, that we are struggling with. We have this fear. Maybe it's a chieftain system that we had before, where you never questioned elders. You respected those in authority, because they are appointed by God. But that does not mean we don't question. We don't raise questions. I think that's a critical piece that I think for me is missing.
The Constitution tried to make of us Kenyans, citizens. That hasn't happened. We still remain the tribe we belong to, and even the president had the audacity to say before the last elections that I think Indians are now the 43rd tribe. And some of us were so angry, I tell you. I am not an Indian. I'm a Kenyan. And to be told, you're Indian, no, you can be happy, you're African. My friends were very angry. And what had happened, some Indians had bribed him a little bit for other kind of reasons, and that was done. Now, the Constitution goes to great lengths to make a distinction between us in our social life or in our traditions, and between our life as a citizen. And even the preamble, it's pretty clear that we are very proud of our ethnicity, our culture, our religion, but we are also citizens, we are Kenyans. And that is important in the political sphere and the public affair generally. And that hasn't happened. The one part of the Constitution which very few people read, understand, and that is the chapter on elections. I have been asked occasionally by the Electoral Commission before the elections on a retreat, what is the structure of the thing? And to my horror, the top people in that thing have not read the relevant chapter. It's not all that long. You can do that in half an hour. That chapter goes, we spend a lot of time trying to make sure that people have their choice, that it's a fair election, but without encouraging that to take on the cloak of ethnicity. We wanted to stop ethnicity in elections. And when I used to talk to these people in charge of our elections, they had not read that chapter. They knew that they were permitting things which were unconstitutional. And of course the politicians loved that. If you look at the Constitution, it says in the section on political parties, it says that no political party will have more than certain percentage, I think it's 30 something, and they can't be registered for elections if they have such a dominance of one particular tribe. And nobody seems to know this. Or if they know, they don't care about it. I've drawn the attention, then we even went as far as to appoint the post of a registrar of societies. And then, once I had a big fight, not fight with her, but I was very upset that she had been giving certificate to companies which clearly violated the norm. And then I said, but you know this, you're educated woman. Why are you signing up when this law says that? And then she laughs at me and said, what could I do? Now, if that is a position people have, and they are in positions of authority in the state, is it surprising that we never progressed? And then again, there is this deceit. Let's say our politics have never really changed away from many factors, including ethnicity. And that is completely against the Constitution. There are sanctions against that. There are punishments against that. And not once I know that has been invoked. So we have never really, I don't mean you, the people in this room, we have still caught up in ethnicity, our tribes or this, whatever that expression is, when their own leaders are well past that. They exploit us, but they don't care for us. So the Constitution was based on certain assumptions, and one of them was the quality of leadership. That hasn't happened. And so I think we just continued with the old leadership, it's the same greed, same will, one day you are sleeping with that, next day you're fighting. Look at the situation today. Headlines, every day will indicate Raila and Mudavadi had a great day and they were shook hands, or not quite shook hands, but, and then next day it's all about how they are fighting. What kind of politics is this? Why don't they say, look here, I don't believe in let's say what, in free education. I want people to pay for this. Or things like that. We should be divided by whether we are kind of socialists or we are capitalists, those kind of factors. And we never moved to that. And therefore, the Constitution, I should say, has been respected. It's clear from the discussion today and my own, over the years, looking at what's been happening. I think it has made a difference. I don't want to overdo it. And many people are respecting it. But the powerful are not doing that. Another factor that I'll stop, I'm going too long, is the security forces. We fought very hard to change the whole character of security forces and the police. And I have shown even to, the top people, police people, you are doing this thing and you can see this is completely different, 100% different from what your real obligations are. You are shooting people, killing people, and you can see exactly, the wording is clear. Now, if they're educated and the wording is clear as their duties, obligations as police, and they don't do it, how can we do it? What can we do about it? So I think civil society has done a good job. I think we need to do more. I think we need to encourage a lot of people to go into politics. I almost get the feeling that civil society has retreated from semi-politics than in the bad days when they were really fighting hard. So some of my thoughts.
Well, I think the gaps and the challenges we have faced and the reason why we've not been able to implement the policies that are already in place, first is political. We must agree that it is political. There is the National Assembly. You'll allow me to speak on resource allocation and especially between the two levels of government. The National Assembly, the Senate, who are the mandated bodies to allow that there is equity between division of revenue vertically, they haven't played their role. What they have actually done is to pull down their role such that equity does not happen. If the Constitution says that the allocation to county government should be at least 15%, then of the recent audited accounts approved by Parliament, then they delay the approval, such that the base for allocation is about 5 years back. When you factor in inflation and the cost of service delivery, then at this current year, that does not communicate to equity. Even if the allocation is slightly above 15% of then the approved accounts. Then they have continued to delay the implementations of these policies, where there are some declarations that health, agriculture, trade, gender issues, education, there should be these allocations. They have continued to delay that agenda by again not doing their very work of approving. Then we have the personal integrity. We have not held the people we put in leadership accountable for public finance management. We have, as a country, agreed that the Ministry of Health should have quite a number of allocation, knowing that health is devolved. And we do not talk about it. And when we talk about it, then we say, no, actually we've realized there is a gap. That money cannot be allocated back to counties. And then we go to the county level, which is the area where we envisaged to see equity at the lowest level, because you are able to interact with your MCA, you are able to interact with your governor at county level. How many of us hold the same people in leadership at the lowest accountability level accountable when the issues of corruption and reallocation and doing supplementary budget that is opposite to what had citizen engagement? Do we question? We don't. And then who are the people we are entrusting with implementing or with implementations of these policies, from the executive level to the technical people within the executive? There are people who have continued to go against the very equity they are supposed to advocate for. So the gaps that you are having in implementation is majorly about 70% of it is political and 30% is personal integrity.
Okay, so clearly from all the panelists, it sounds like our challenge is a political accountability one. And I think the political accountability side also has the role that citizens have to play. And I think the point that Abraham was making is also exactly how siloed or not siloed citizens are. So how much does that affect where Njoki sits, which is mobilizing citizens? So that compartment of citizens is also sounds like a challenge that also we have to overcome. Now, I need to shift to the crowd so that at least we can get some questions away, and then we'll finish with the panelists at the end. So I want to open it up to questions. Anyone who has any question? I don't have a mic, so I'll just hand this one away. So, yes, I can see Alex, so we'll just, Mokera will move the mic around. Okay.
So thank you very much. My name is Alex Njero. I work for Cambridge Wellcome Trust. My question is directed to Professor Guy, and I was asking whether the experience during coming up with a constitution or current efforts to reform the constitution capture the essence that we need to have a dialogue with ourselves, like we have agreed on the values that us as a country should propagate, like us as a country, like for example, the values of equity. Do we have agreement that all of us, these are values as a society that we aspire to? Thank you very much.
My name is Noah. I think my question is directed to Professor Yash. This year, and like many other years since devolution, CRA, the commission that is mandated to recommend, and even both levels of government have not been agreeing on what should go to the county. In the county, in the DORA, the Division of Revenue process. My question is there anything, maybe, Prof, that you think could have been done in the Constitution to avoid the stalemate that we saw this year, particularly the dragging of the stalemate this year?
Okay, thank you. The next question, Professor Guy, is there a possibility that Kenya as a Commonwealth country can petition on debt ceiling, which the President and the Parliament passed, which is affecting the common mwananchi? Also, is there a possibility where we as a citizen can request international intervention in regards to this debt? Do we have the correct debt and how much do we owe and who do we owe as a nation. In this Equity Week, maybe it would be a good way to focus on that. Thank you.
Can I go on?
I'll get in so much trouble with Joki, but then he does not ask a question.
Okay, thank you. My question, I don't know goes to who, but basically to the panel. With the fight against forces, resources, and spaces, I don't know what we need to do, because in terms of this war against equity. So what do you think, what is your own perspective that need to be done in a situation that we're able to unlock this bottleneck, whereby again, we are like, instead of including the excluded, then we are excluding the included. And this is what I mean. The Constitution is very clear in terms of public participation that people are supposed to participate, come up with opinions, ideas, and priorities. Now it comes a situation whereby again, another document is made, the PFM, that again gives the assemblies or whatever, the executive power to amend the decisions through supplementaries that again excludes the ideas and the opinions of the citizens. And then the supplementary is the one that's is going to be worked upon in terms of resource allocation and all those. So what do you think that need to be done so that we don't again exclude the included? Thank you.
Okay, my concern is not really a question, but a concern on Article 104. This goes to Professor Yash. Is there anything we can do such that, because you always talk about social accountability on leaders and everything, is there anything we can do to Article 104, because there are gaps there, so that it can be fully implemented? If a leader does not deliver, we just do away with that. Because we normally talk about, but we are not looking at what do we do with this person who is not doing what he's supposed to do. So I'm just concerned about Article 104.
Okay, so we'll take those ones first. So the questions, so Prof, there are quite a number of questions coming from the way. So there's a question about what we can do, especially, let me turn that around. So there's a question about exactly how the relationship between the two houses of parliament and the stalemate they are causing when it comes to the division of revenue, especially the vertical division of revenue. Is there something, and probably I can add to that question, is there something that the people in this room, who are mostly from the civil society side, can do? But even more importantly, is there an anticipation of how those two houses were to relate? I think that's a question for you. A question for you, Njoki, I think is related to the issue of inclusion. I've separated Willy's question into two parts. How do we ensure there is inclusion and without losing the gains that we've made so far? For Abraham, still from Willy's question, I think there's a question of how in the public finance space, priorities and reprioritization and prioritization again as the budget goes has become a very tricky space. So how do we handle that space? And of course for you, Mercy, is exactly what kind of relationship can civil society organizations have so that we can demystify that budgeting space so that it becomes a bit more open to engagement, especially after the budgets have been approved and now implementation is happening. There's been a lull in that space. Like citizens engage a lot in saying what they want, but when it comes to the implementation side of it, it's a bit more quiet. So how can, or what opportunities exist from where you sit at the Council of Governors for citizens to engage a bit more in the implementation of the budget space? So I'll start with you and then we'll come round.
Thank you, John. From my opinion, I think there is a gap in holding in analyzing the budget implementation. Like when the counties are budgeting, in the last financial year, 46 of them had 30% for development. When the report of the Controller of Budget came, only 23 counties spent 30% of that money on development. So I think you have a space to analyze the implementation of budgets. When we have now finished doing the budgeting, when we are done with the budgeting cycle, we have engaged the citizen, and then the supplementary come and we are reallocate money. I think you need to fight for your space in budget implementation. Hold those offices accountable of what they promised when the citizens were there. Thank you.
There are a number of questions, and there are some questions which my colleagues here are much better qualified to answer than I can. But I would say that, no, where do I begin? Let's talk about the so-called, or I shouldn't say so-called, but the question of reform and what role we are going to be able to play. I think we will hopefully get one set of proposals, which are kind of BBI, I suppose, very shortly. As the papers tell us, the group had decided or proposed for some time ago, but they can't disclose it until the two leaders have given and obviously there is some discussion going on. I've seen earlier versions, but I'm no longer sure they are actually in the present one, which seem to me unobjectionable. And the document which triggered off all this was a joint letter from the President and Raila to this group, pointing it and saying, these are the issues that are bothering us. Can you work out some way to deal with them? And then they sent it to me, and when I read it, I was so pleased, because the 9 points that 2 of them had raised as requiring more observation were all taken from the Constitution. In other words, what they are saying, we like this very much. Can we strengthen it? And so I was, of course, very pleased that here were the 2 great leaders, and they were setting up a committee, a reasonable committee, to say, no, you must strengthen the Constitution along these 9 lines. But then somehow it seemed to take a different turn, and it got into restructuring of the Constitution. And even that, this is a very personal thing, some possible changes would not make me unhappy. As you know, the history of this Constitution is that it went through different phases. I would say 80% of the Constitution is what we made, Bomas, and the 20% was made entirely by politicians sitting in Nevasha, ignoring everyone, including the committee of experts, and even people today who are saying we need a parliamentary system voted for a presidential system because they thought, wow, I'm going to become the president. I want all this power. It's really crass as that. So I would say that if what we see in a few days' time is a restoration of some of the things which were taken away. The two things I particularly would like to see be changed. I do think we would do better with the prime ministerial system. And then the other question is about devolution. And I do think that devolution has been a good thing for us, but the structure of devolution that we had developed was of a different nature. There would have been 3 tiers, the center, about 17 units at the national level, and then under those there would be administrative units. And we didn't really want to use ethnicity as a basis as it has become today, unfortunately. We wanted to overcome that. And that's why we wanted 17 out of 45, 50 people, groups. And then we did want some authority at the lower level, but for some kind of administrative purposes. Now, if these two elements were restored, I would be quite happy. Though some people might say, well, they shouldn't be interfering. I think if we could restore things to the original Bomas, that would be good. You see, one aspect of this draft is that it was made by Kenyans. I'm repeating that, but also if you look at the structure of decision making, there were 1/3 politicians, 1/3 people from the counties, or districts as we call them, and 1/3 people like you and me, ordinary people, professional people, people with disability, special number of seats for women. So it was that body which made the decision about this constitution. I mean, what more could you ask? And when it was put to a referendum later on, got nearly 70%. So I would be quite happy to see it restored to the Bomas days. I would be happy with some other arrangements too, but I'm not very happy with the way our politics are going. So anyway, so that's my view on that. Now the questions about revenue, I have colleagues here who are much better qualified. But what I like to say is that we tried to, when it came to question of counties or whatever we were thinking before, in the idea, in the three structure thing I mentioned. So I found certainly that nobody in the CKRC was very well versed in economics. And so what we did was we went to the top Kenyan economists. We spent 3-4 days with them. We said, well, these are some of the more economic kind of questions, and we are not very qualified. Well, they were very helpful. We sat down, we discussed, and then I said, well, can you put all this on paper? And that's really what we have. There is flexibility, I think more than people realize. Flexibility between the national government and counties, ethnicity, flexibility as between, in the Mombasa and the government quarrels now. It seems that everything is very rigid. I was asked by Mombasa people for my views, and rereading for the 100th time the Constitution, I could see that things need not be as, they're very flexible. If you look at the original, Article 4 or something, or early ones, flexibility there, sharing ideas, working together. Then you go to the chapter on devolution. Again, there's a lot of flexibility. So why are we not using that? It becomes very rigid almost. this is center, this is county. It's not like that. There's a lot of flexibility in. So I think we haven't really used, I mean, we may not have much choice, but I think the government people, public servants, haven't really made use of the flexibility that we have. So I can't say very much about finance. And then I don't know what other questions there were. Commonwealth. Well, I mean, Commonwealth is itself in great need of treatment. And I wouldn't really go to the Commonwealth at this stage. I mean, the day of when I used to be on the Commonwealth Human Rights Committee for a number of years, and we were tough on governments, even senior governments. Now that sort of has all disappeared, and the Commonwealth, there's nothing there, I'm afraid. What we could consider, I think, are some international institutions, because the real strength of internationally of human rights is not so much the Commonwealth, it is the global references, or you might say UN, under UN auspices. And there are a number of provisions which I think we'll benefit with. We did, of course, study these international conventions before we did the Bill of Rights that we have. I think in our own Bill of Rights, it's the longest chapter in the whole Constitution. We put a lot of importance on this, but we have never really tried to mobilize it. I mentioned earlier the breaches of it. The courts haven't always been very helpful either. The whole chapter on integrity of public servants, which I thought was going to make a big difference. The judges were not so helpful in the early days. So there are maybe ways of thinking about it again. You don't need to amend it. You just need correct reading of it. But I'm afraid the Commonwealth is not where we go. On the question of the right of recall, now that's a very interesting question because when I was, or we were, but this was my sort of idea, I said that so many of our politicians are so corrupt, so incompetent, and we must do something about it. And there are a number of countries which have a provision in their constitution for removal of parliamentarians who are not working or following the constitution, the laws, other things, and their constituents should be able to remove them. Of course, the politicians didn't like it, but they were only 1/3, and it went through in Beaumont, and it was continued for a while. And our provisions would have removed an MP, but they had to prove certain, we had listed things that they mustn't do, but if they, I think even 30% or something, not very high proportion, could go seek the removal, and the process would be triggered, which I think would have captured the person, the MP who was targeted, but if conduct was okay, there was kind of protection. Well, what happened? It went through Beaumont okay, but it went the next step up. It was changed. So the present provision for removing an MP has become very difficult. And if you read the Parliament, because this matter was decided in House of in Parliament, and it's of course all available. And I've read it sometimes with great amusement because every single MP who spoke was saying, this is outrageous, this is outrageous. But they couldn't remove it completely. So what they did was to make it very high requirement before MP could be removed, not enough to prove these things were wrong, high percentage of people would vote and so on. Well, that is the law today. But about a few years ago, Katiba Institute was approached by a group in Kisumu who said, there have been terrible things done, we can't get it through the judiciary. Well, we worked on this, and the judiciary, I think, supported us, but that law was somehow never changed. So that it still remains that. If I'm wrong, please correct me, people in here. So I think there have been maybe one instance or so where we probably, applying the original formula, would have got rid of many, many of them. And I suppose I knew that. So it is, I think, a big shame because we were hoping through this mechanism to get a political group given to serving the people. And I always think when I was a student in England, we used to invite MPs in our college. They would come for the weekend, they would stay there, they would talk to us. And then one of them, when he went back to London and so on, he said to me, you come for a day, look at parliamentary proceedings, look at this, look at that. And so I spent a day in Parliament on the platform, and I was so impressed by, the procedure, though of course it has got worse since then. I'm talking of a long time ago. And I came home so impressed. And then the MP took me to lunch, and it was very nice. Just a simple student from Kenya. And then I mentioned this to somebody about this MP. And he says, he's fantastic. He is one of the best lawyers in this country. He makes a lot of money. He gave it all up to serve the people. And his salary now is barely 1/4 of what he was earning only a short while ago. So there you could see people who came to politics because they wanted to serve. Now, can you help us all to restore that kind of ethics? The one particular element that I managed to have squeezed in was negated by the politicians. And the interesting thing was that I used to sit in Parliament quite often in those days, our Parliament, and they were always fighting each other, politicians fighting, or parties fighting. When it comes to things like that, they quickly close their ranks. So maybe that's enough. I have done enough abuse today of important people.
I think I was asked, and I will be very brief. One of our biggest challenges right now to implementation of budgets of public policy is the whole discussion around supplementary budgets. And the answer to this is not simple because it is nothing less of changing the law. But as I think Mokera talked about it earlier, and John also, is really about practice, because the essence of a supplementary budget is not to create new priorities. The essence of a supplementary budget is to respond to practice on the ground. So for instance, if it is clear that the projects we had planned in agriculture will not be implemented in the current financial year because of a certain reason, then it makes sense maybe to shift some of that money to focus on something else that is more critical, but not to be completely reorganized as is happening right now, where budgets just get slashed every 2 months. We have had counties doing supplementaries as much as 6 times in a financial year. When you change your budget 6 times in a financial year, basically it means there's no policy priority that you are pursuing. I think 2 things, one of it which we are trying to do at the IBP is to encourage more and more people to follow the implementation, to ask questions around what is being implemented. What we realize, the reason why there's been a quick turnaround in terms of how allocations are done, love them or hate them, how they are done, is because there's a lot of participation at the point of planning and at the point of approving budgets. So people engage, and they engage very, very, very powerfully. But as soon as the budgets are approved, people go to relax and wait for the next financial year. But that space, nobody wants to be asked questions. So whenever people ask questions, there's a sense in which then they become reasonable. Sometimes we've mooted. The second point is also just asking ourselves, did we put the threshold for supplementary budgets too low in the law? Of course, there's a long debate there, because really the Constitution, as I read it, envisioned that you'll be dealing with rational people, you'll be dealing with people who can reason and be reasoned with. We get less of the second part. We assume they reason, but we don't get much of the reasoning with. To be able to say this, we think is a critical space. And if I was to change the law, one thing I will change is to make sure that every supplementary budget is also subjected to public participation. I think that would make it a bit slightly more difficult. It will make people think a bit more before they start preparing a supplementary budget. The second thing I wanted to talk about is the whole discussion around division of revenue. We have spoken this, I think, 1,000,000 times in Senate, in any space that we have been given. We still think that it will be helpful to come up with the costing of functions that we have devolved in different ways. And part of that is not so much to come up with the actual money that counties should get and national government should get, but is to give us an indicative of what kind of spending we should be spending on the different functions. For instance, and colleagues from CRA are not here, part of the challenge that we have raised to them, that it is good to go parameter-wise in terms of specific areas of service delivery, healthcare, agriculture, urban services, and the rest. But what informs the percentage allocated to healthcare? Is it the indicative cost of providing healthcare, or is it just a figure? So that because healthcare is the most devolved function of all. Because that conversation is important to be able to determine when we do an audit of how we have done in healthcare the next, after 10 years, after 15 years, can we match what we see as indicators to the kind of allocations we have done, so that it's not arbitrary, as it were. Thank you.
Thank you. I was asked the question on exclusion. I do first want to make a comment on this question of the Commonwealth, not on the merit of the Commonwealth as an institution, but on the issue of how we get accountability from government and from the people that we have voted, or who have ended up being our leaders. And I think that we make a terrible mistake when we do not seek that accountability at the national level, and we go to, whether it's the Commonwealth or the World Bank and the IMF, the development partners are very popular. What is it doing? I think it's a very anti-democratic, anti-small d democratic practice, where we are saying that our governments are more accountable and listen more, not to us, but to others, because of the purses that they happen to hold, etc., etc., because this should be about us. It should be about our country. It should be about us holding them accountable. So I just want to say that I am very opposed to the idea that we go to the development partners or the World Bank or the Commonwealth or whoever to compel our government to do any number of things. What we need to be doing is organizing our citizens so that they listen to us. And it leads to the question on exclusion, because it's about voice. It is about accountability. I sit here wearing the hat of the Fight Inequality Alliance, which is organizing across, not just in Kenya, but around the world, in many countries on this question of inequality. When you listen to the narrative on inequality, everybody from the Pope to the IMF to, I don't know who, to governments, to the UN, they all agree that inequality is a problem. The question we are asking is, how do we deal with it? How do we deal with the inequality? We look at how it manifests in people's lives, and then we look at how it is about the structural deficits that exist. It's not just that in Kenya I go to a school or to a hospital and I don't have services. It's that this is happening in country after country, and it's about the political economy of the whole world in terms of how it is structured. Because when the UN talks about SDG 10 being about inequalities between countries and within countries, it is actually a recognition of that structure or that state system that goes from the top to the bottom. So who decides? It says here that in the equity conversation, every voice counts. And this is quite serious. It's not, because we have to be engaged, and we have to be engaged with others for our own sakes and for the sake of our country. It's not about charity or helping out other people. It is about the kind of country that we want to live in. And if we are living in a country where some people are excluded all the time, because of their ability, because of their ethnicity, because of their gender, because of their geography, because of whatever reason that someone will come up with to exclude some and include others, then we have a problem. So our voices, and it is our voices and our engagement in that in the processes that where decisions are made. So just to give a quick push or quick plug to the Fight Inequality Alliance, seated in the back is my colleague Antonia, because in January, around the global protest to fight inequality, Antonia, you should probably stand up and wave so that they can see you, and they know that you're not a figment of my imagination. There is Antonia. She has some flyers of activities that we are planning in January. And I want to invite you. I'm all about recruiting people to give their voice, to give their energy, their skills, and their talents to engage in these processes. The processes to come up with demands on inequality. Because, and I know you're looking at me, I want to make my last point, is that we know what works. Not just in Kenya, around the world, we know what works to fight inequality. We know about the Nordic model of universal health and universal education, of good working conditions, of rule of law. We know what works. And that is what we need to push and to work to make sure that it is here. We see the Nordic model, the so-called Nordic model, under assault. I said I am of the old free primary education system. It worked. Some of us here may even remember when you could go to a government hospital, get treatment, good treatment, get medication there, get everything that you needed. If you're referred to Kenyatta Hospital in the right, proper way, Kenyatta Hospital is a great place to go, but God forbid, should you walk in, you're going to rue the day you were born, the day you got sick. What is it that is making our systems exclude people based on all the things that I have mentioned and many others? The only way they can be included is if we are taking the time to make sure that our voices and our efforts are part of the process. We don't need people speaking on our behalf. We don't need people engaging in kizungu mingi, explaining what our problems are in a way that we don't even recognize them as our problems. We need to be the ones telling our stories, fighting our battles. We need to pass the mic so people can speak.
Thank you very much. As I told you when I was introducing my panels, Njoki is an activist of activists. Kuna activists and there is Njoki. But I always am happy to interact with her. So I need to stop because I'm already 20 minutes past my time. And I want to thank the panelists. I think the one big takeaway is that in Kenya we are dealing with an issue of political accountability, and it's important for us to appreciate that at the end of the day, the people with the last say in many of the things we do are politicians. So holding them accountable is not a maybe, it's something that we have to do. Whether it's on budgets, whether it's in healthcare, the people with the final say is either the MCAs, is either the MPs, or is either the elected officials that are in the executive. So it's important for us to do that. Secondly, the inclusivity conversation is an ongoing discussion. We have to constantly try and make steps, but also keep checking whether the steps we are making, we are leaving anyone behind. And I think as Njoki said, there's always sometimes a very intentional pushing people out of the loop when we are supposed to be bringing them in. And then the last one is that as citizens, the accountability part of what citizens do is something, especially in the civil society, we have to keep paying attention to. Working with communities, working with champions within communities, so that that level of knowledge also sits with the communities. It's not us parachuting to the counties and back to Nairobi with that knowledge. It's us actually working with communities and building the champions with those communities. So I want to thank my panelists today. So Mercy from the Council of Governors, Professor Yash from Katiba Institute, Njoki from Fight Inequality Alliance, and Abraham Rugo, who is from the International Budget Partnership. Makofi tafadhali. So I'll stop there, and that's where my session for the day ends. So the only people sitting between you and lunch is someone called Mokera Nyagaka and Josephine Wambui, who will either decide to go for lunch in the next 5 minutes or the next 3 hours. So I'll stop there and invite them for the final session on the way forward. Thank you very much.
Actually, I think the people between us and lunch are you guys. So it's because of you that we'll go for lunch soon. And I'm hungry. Yeah, I really want to go for lunch. So what I need you to do, I need you to pull out your cell phone, your mobile phone, or if you have a laptop, or like any equipment that can get you into the internet. Remember, you are standing between us and lunch. Pull out your phones or any equipment that can get you into the internet. If you don't have one, you can just do it with your neighbor. And okay, everyone, if you don't have one, you can just sit next to someone who does. Then I want you to come up with a nickname and put it in this screen here, which John is going to help us project.
It's your laptop?
Yes. So come up with a nickname so that we don't know exactly who you are. Or if you're working the two of you, you'll come up with a nice nickname and put it here so that we see that the technology is working. So I want you to go to www.menti.com, which is www.menti.com. Okay. So please put your nickname there. You go to www.menti.com and use the code. So when you get to www.menti.com, put 102648. Ten 2648. It's up there on the top right. The code is there. Yes, we have one person. TBM. Thanks. Spider Woman. We're here having discussions on equity. And people are called Spider Woman. Kase, okay, thank you. Wale was, you guys, Dallas team. What does that mean? Teflon. My goodness. Che. Majanga mat. Okay. You guys are just hilarious. What's Pusha T? Okay. Oh, we have the A-Team. Go you, A-Team. Okay. If you still haven't put your name, you can just lift your hand. We won't know which one you put. Just put your hand up so we can move to the next slide if you already put your names. Chairman. Nimimi. Wow. You guys are creative human beings. Professor Yash, have you put a nickname? Is yours Kwa Ground? Oh, you're doing a family nickname. It's okay. Kimidolo? Trump. Okay. I think we've had enough fun with this one. Can we move to the next one? Anyone who hasn't and wants to? One person I'm seeing keying in their cell phone. I hope they're not on Facebook. They're just trying to write their nickname. Okay, good. We now know at least we have 32 people participating or thereabout. You can answer the next ones. You don't have to answer this. Now, this is a question for all of us. Sounds like everyone has their own definition on what equity is. What is yours? And if you're working in twos, a short one. Don't write a paragraph. What is your definition of equity? Oh, I don't know why that's equity. That apostrophe is wrongly put, but yeah, it was supposed to be a quotation mark. Giving everyone as they need. Fairness. Okay, don't write fairness. Don't write what is it? What are they called? Don't write a synonym of equity. Define it, describe it. And tribalism. Wow. It's us guys who are writing this. Addressing needs. It's about equality of outcomes. Capital. So if you wrote fairness, it's fine. You can give more than one answer. Tell us what you mean by fairness. And all the people who've written one word. Sharing resources equally, it's dignity. All the people who've written one word, please go back and give us another description. More than one word at least. parallel and horizontal equilibrium. Whoa. Need-based approach. But what about capacity? What about what people have already? Can it be equity? Having equal opportunities. That's what we want to get to, right? Caring with no limit. Good. We've lost 2 people. Oh, looks like people are still typing. I'm going to move to the next one unless someone is actually drafting something. Oh, okay. Good. I was just going to do that part for us to know we're using Mentimeter, and then I'm going to leave to Josephine to keep us from lunch.
No. I will definitely not do that. I just want us to have a quick reflection session on what we've done today. And the first one is, what have you had that you have found intriguing? So just reflect. A couple of seconds, reflect. There's something you have had that has intrigued you. So what is this you have had that has intrigued you? Tell us. And you can put unlimited number of intriguing things. Do not be limited by one. It has not been intriguing. It's not working. Okay, let's check.
What's not working? I wonder what it will be then. Is it the internet? Let's refresh. Can you see where it's refresh?
Where is refresh? So the second.
Is it the second one?
Okay, good. Control R.
You go and control R
Yeah.
on the screen.
We are working on it. Just a second.
Is it refreshing? Can you see it now?
Okay. It's refreshing. It's refreshing.
Could be the internet, right?
It's showing. Okay, great. So what have you found intriguing?
You've had a little bit of time to think about it.
What have you found intriguing? Community groups have real impact on issues qua ground.
This must come from the person who was called Background.
This was from qua ground. Use of data to reduce disasters. That CRA new formula will include urban areas. That equity has been mentioned 14 times in the Constitution. Equity. The work of the group from Baringo, Council of Governors, spoke about how they try to ensure balance in resource coming from donors. Supplementary budgets need to be subjected to public participation. That we have great minds in Kenya, but we do not seem to be applying them fully. End game for equity is equality. Public participation ought to be very representative. The power is with the people. Yash Palgai said Kenyans were better off before 2010. We all know that's pure wisdom. Right. The answer to what to expect from public participation is still not very clear in my view. Very good. I like that one. Who is keeping us from lunch? You are keeping us from lunch. Busia is the third poorest county. No VAT on helicopter spare parts, unlike sanitary pads.
Isn't this amazing that it's anonymous? So yes, you can put whatever you want.
Okay. We'll just wait for maybe one or two more, but as we do that, maybe there is one who would like to share. I want to give an opportunity to just one person to just, if they want to explain a bit more on what they found intriguing, just one person. So the first person who puts up their hand literally gets the mic.
Mine was Maisha Mbaya, Siasa Mbaya. We've heard about good policies that we have, legislations that we've passed, but what really has come out is that our politicians have not really been implementing what is there, even when it comes to public participation, in terms of what the Act requires, availing the information, but then the participation is not effective in the sense that the citizens who engage in the public participation will find that they do not have adequate information. And even the Public Participation Act talks about creation of awareness, capacity building, in terms of good selection, to have a representative group. But you find that it's prearranged, such that it's not effective in the end. So it is the bad politics that we've had that has caused all these problems. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. We'll now go to the last question, which is, we've all said what we found intriguing. We have asked very many questions. We have pointed fingers at others, maybe to ourselves to some extent. So this is where the rubber meets the road. What are you individually, or as an organization, if you're able to speak for your organization, what are you going to take forward? The rubber meets the road. So reflect on this. I know it's anonymous, but let's be very, let's think ahead. We all have a responsibility. So what are you as an individual or organization going to take forward? We go to the streets. Right?
A strong first one.
Yeah. I will take this information to the people at the grassroots. I need to be an active participant in public matters. Hold duty bearers accountable. How? How are you going to do that? Seek to get a seat at the decision-making table. Great. Which one? Get involved in politics. Don't leave it to them. Advocate for change. Participate in public participation. Involve citizens in evidence. I've lost that one. Implementation of existing policies. Before we craft more or new policies, I will educate and mobilize my fellow citizens.
Even for this one, you can put many things that you're going to do.
Yeah, you can have more than one. Yeah. Okay, as we're doing this, I want to also give an opportunity to anyone who feels they want to go public in making their commitment? Yeah, this is not anonymous. Okay, great. So we'll have, I see 2 hands, so we'll have yourself and the gentleman at the back. And to also to be fair, any lady who would like to share commitment? Okay, I will share mine.
Yeah, mine goes towards trying to request Parliament and National Assembly and Parliament in regards to formulating a policy, reviewing the 1953 Penal Code, where the criminal system, justice system, gives loophole to those people who are corrupt, who are misusing the resources, and who are also getting reprieve from the justice system to use these resources that they are amassing, which is causing massive problem to us. Thank you.
Great. Very specific. There was a gentleman at the back.
Well, mine is all about encouraging citizens to take part in all policy processes. They should follow them. And you find that these days citizens are just tired. They participate in public participations, but what they have suggested is not what is happening. When the MCAs go inside there, they change everything to suit their political way. While what Mwananchi, the common Mwananchi had suggested is not happening. So mine is to make them not to be tired and take those duty bearers to be accountable.
Great, thank you. And I hope you will take that. You will also not be tired.
I'm not tired, actually.
Good. So I will share mine, and I will start by sharing my reflections based on what I have had today. And for me, the first one that stood out is we've been talking about moving from policy to practice. And you know, I've been thinking, and some people have mentioned, we need to, it might mean we start speaking truth to power. So how are we going to do that to bring about the change? So that's the question to my mind. And it could mean we go to the streets. I've been thinking about the need to understand, to be able to move from policy to practice, the need to understand the different interests, the different power dynamics, the politics that would influence that shift. Because as we've had, there are people who are deliberately and intentionally pushing people behind. I think it's also very important to continue having conversations such as this and continue asking the questions, because as long as we are not talking, someone else is talking behind a closed door and things are moving to their direction. So that's something to always think about. And I think this has been said over and over, learning and reshaping what it is we are doing and using the flexibility that we have. I think Prof has said very clearly, it's not rigid. We have flexibility. So learning to be flexible in moving from policy to practice is very important. The second thing that stood out for me is there's been a changing face of public participation, pre-devolution to post-devolution, as well as in this space of devolution. So what are we learning with regards to public participation? And what are we going to do about the different things that we're learning to make sure that public participation actually works for the citizenry? So that's something in my mind. The third one is we have different organizations represented here. And everyone is doing something. Is there something that we're doing that is working at cross purposes from someone else? Is it time to come together? Of course, noting the differences, of course, noting the different strategies. Is it time to come together to make sure that we get the big picture? Are we building on one side or building with one hand and destroying with the other? I think that is a conversation as the different organizations and different individuals we need to start having. The fourth is the discussion about equity and equality. And I know Prof said that we might not need to get stuck with the definition. And I remember Kibet asked that question. And in my mind, I'm thinking we have this conversation on Equity Week every year around this time. So are we going to pack up and leave and wait until next year, November or October, to have this conversation? Are there things as partners we can do between now and then to start shifting this conversation? To start to talk about what equity is in terms of practice that will make a difference with it, as we demystify budgets, as we work on health, as we work on the different formulas. Are there things we can do? And I know we'll talk about there is no money or there is no time, but if this is something that's close to our heart, then we need to make the time, and we need to find creative ways of making money not hold us back. I think the last thing for me is something Prof said. Let's not lose hope. There's always hope. There's always hope. It's a journey. If I think about the journey that Prof has been from this space to where he is now, it is a journey and it's not over. And he hands the different batons over to different people. So there is one that you have taken, as you've suggested what you're going to take forward, and there is more we still need to do. If you don't do your bit, then what's your contribution to society? So thank you. I'll hand this over to Rugo, who I cannot see. Yes, Rugo. But thank you very much. Let's remember what we have committed to do, and let's keep reflecting as we move along, and make sure we are contributing to this society that is Kenya.
So you want me to announce that there is no lunch? Thank you very much, colleagues. Thanks for creating time to come into these conversations. As I had mooted earlier, these are difficult conversations. They can make us a bit uncomfortable, but we think that is part of what we must do to be able to make sure this becomes a reality. So therefore, thank you very much from all the colleagues that handle the World Cafes. I hope that exercise was helpful, and we pray that you will continue to do more of that. Thank you for each of you for creating time and spending time with us. There is lunch, which I want to invite all of us. So please don't eat and run quickly. Eat and get to know 2-3 people that you didn't know about. These are basically almost all the colleagues, I would imagine, who are working on this agenda in this country are represented here. And with that, may God bless you and have a good afternoon and good weekend ahead. Thank you very much. I suspect lunch is served the same place where we took tea. Yes, so it's the same place we took tea, lunch will be served there. Enjoy.
I am Lewis Kundai from Fahamu Africa. I'm a program associate. I have learned a couple of things from this event, and the first thing that I've come to recognize or learn in that case would be the fact that we're supposed to actually put more action into the implementation of policies to bridge that gap that is there between the provision of policies and the actualization of those policies. As a matter of fact, what came up a lot is the fact that there's been delays in the implementation of policies by government officials, and that should be what we should tackle. And that is essentially a gap that I've seen. And also, on top of that, is the other aspect on what we as state actors, as I would call us, would contribute to this process of promoting equity. And we particularly from the organization I come from, is we look into this from an angle of involving movements and bringing people together, as we have done in this conference, to push for these agendas on a day-to-day basis so that we can achieve equity. Going forward, I think the best approach to this would be talking with the various stakeholders, approaching them and getting what their strategies are, the different strategies, and if they've worked in the different sectors they are in, and trying to see if we can collectively come up with ideas to promote equity. I particularly enjoyed the fact that we had Professor Guy, who actually touched on the fact that we should now, as non-state actors, basically the civil society, we should move towards having our own leaders, elected leaders. We should take up these spaces in government, for example, so that we can have somebody in the inside pushing for these policies. Yeah.
How can it be improved now?
How can having leaders be improved? The event. I think the whole point of the event is to bring together people, to bring minds together, so that we can come up with ideas and strategies to push the equity agenda forward. So the whole point is have more people, broaden the scope of broaden your reach to different actors, try and bring in students, particularly as I would advocate as I'm a student. I would tend to think that having students on board and having civic education will enhance participation and bring more strategies on board. You're welcome. I hope that's okay. I hope that was good.
I was asking, you can edit out some words. Stand here. It's here. No, just come here. Perfect.
Hapo sawa. So you utanielekeza what I'm talking.
Yes.
You have guides, eh?
Guide.
Okay. So I'm tall.
You are tall. You are blessed.
I'm blessed upwards. I love that.
So you tell us your name? You tell us your name, what you do, and then you tell us what you learned from the event. 1 second. And then I'll guide you from there.
Okay, thank you.
Just give me a second so you'll talk to her. It's like I'm not here.
Okay.
Okay, good.
So thank you. My name is Willie Sumba, and Willie Sumba, I come from Busia County, which is in the western region of Kenya. And I work with the Community Empowerment and Development Center, CDC. And what we do work around governance, trying to provide civic education to citizens in terms of constitution, their rights and entitlements, and then how are they able to pick up on civic actions in terms of social accountability. And basically we do this using scorecards as well as budget analysis, and then partnering closely with the county government in terms of looking at policies, how are they responding towards citizens' needs, and are they responding to citizens' maybe ideas and ideologies, apart from just being like the duty bearers or the elites, friendly policies. So that's the stuff we do around in Busia County. Yeah.
So what did you learn from the event?
So thank you. This was a very rich conversation and discussions as well as engagement. One of the critical things that was coming out is that we already have policies. We have so many frameworks. And as a country or some counties, how are we able again to translate these particular policies and frameworks as well as laws into actions, apart from just gathering dust? Because we have so many good frameworks. That's what we mean again, coming from policies to the real practices. So how are we able to bring things on paper to the actions? That's one thing that I've seen very rich discussions around this particular workshop, as well as also learning that there are so many other actors trying to work around advocating for equity and equalities across the country, and then trying to define how equities and inequalities manifest in the country. So this is a very good gathering, a very good forum, whereby again we are able to harness what we are doing so that we are not doing as a different scattered people, but working collectively. So one thing that is striking me is basically how are we able to collect that, to bring together this collective agency or collective community of actors across the space so that we are able to speak with a big voice. Remember, numbers speak volumes. Yeah.
So what did you like?
So one thing that I liked most was even the opportunity for the panel. So in that we had a panel that different experts, different players around the space. People like Professor Yashpal Gai, people came and fought the war or the things around constitutionalism, ladies like Njoki, people like Abraham Rugo were doing stuff around budget work. So the engagement around the panel, trying to define, trying to reason differently around matters of equity and inequalities, as well as what constitution and law speak about, and even providing a room for us to engage and understand more, giving in questions was something that I liked most, as well as the World Cafe was very informative, because I had to learn things around what Cambridge is doing, what Cambridge Trust is doing, what CEDG is doing, what we also presented CDC, what we are doing, what DI are doing, what other partners are doing, IPFK. So World Cafe was also a very rich area that we learned a lot even from what CRA are doing.
So from your opinion, how can it be improved? The Equity Week, how can it be improved?
So the discussions around Equity Week, how it can be improved, I think we need more time in terms of presentation on the World Cafe, because again, this is a space where we get to know actually we can say the rubber meets the road. Actually, the dynamic things that are happening across the county and how we are able to synergize our efforts together. So it was like given a shorter time. So if you can, again, add more time in terms of the World Cafe. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Asante.
Let me grab
Oh,
the mic.
hii ni yenu? Si ningeenda na